All right, so we are beginning this week the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, and since we're no longer, doing the triennial cycle or any particular cycle, since we're only reading a few snippets, um, I'm not limiting myself to the readings from the particular triennial. Um, which is a good thing actually, because the biggest chunk of the first triennial of the parsha is taken up with names and genealogies, and there's not a heck of a lot of Rashi on it. Um, which would mean a very short class, which, if this were like elementary school or high school, that would be a good thing because you wouldn't want to be here anyway, but you're here voluntarily. So, presumably you actually, want to have some material. And does everybody have the text that I sent out? Everybody has it? Yeah. Okay. And people can unmute themselves for this class. We it's a small group and we discuss. So we can do that. All right. So so we begin with the commandment by God to take a census, right? And automatically this is going to be problematic, right? Because as a general rule, the Torah forbids taking a census, right? The Torah forbids taking a census. And, now that we're doing Minyan on Zoom, it's easy to see whether we have a Minyan or not, because you look to the right and it says participants and it tells you the number of participants, right? When we're in the shul and I'm trying to ascertain whether we have a minyan, you're not supposed to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, you're aware of this, right? I mean, there are two different ways of doing it. There's a verse from Psalms that has 10 words. So you go Hoshea et Amecha Uvarech et Nachlatecha Ureim Benasem Ad Olam. You got 10, right? Because you're allowed to count words in a verse, right? Or else people go not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, right? So being aware of that.
I've heard that.
As you're what? Stan? Somebody say something? So being aware of that, Rashi is going to have a little difficulty reconciling those two things. Okay, so if you look at the first verse that that I brought here, it says, take the sum or take a census. The Hebrew says se'u et rosh, which literally means lift up the head of all the congregation of Israel. So take the sum or take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel by families following their fathers' houses. Lemishpechotam leveit avotam, by families according to their fathers' houses. B'mispar shemot kol zachar legulgalotam, a head count of every male according to their numbers of the number of their names. Okay, so there's a lot here to unpack. Before we plunge into the Rashi, is there anything that leaps out at you that might be worthy of commentary? All right, so we'll go on. Look, Lemishbechotam, by families. Da minyan kol shevet v'shevet. Okay, so we need to know the number of people in each tribe, right? Not just the total number of Israelites, but the number of each tribe, right? And I mean, it's interesting, right? We see that wrangling over the census even today, right? I mean, should we have the citizenship question? Should we not have the citizenship question? You know, undercounts, overcounts, adjusting, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Because resources are distributed according to the census, right? And also taxes conceivably could be apportioned according to the census, right? And now this is going to be way down the line, but when they cross into the land is distributed by census, right? Each tribe gets a certain allocation of land, right? And the more people in the tribe, the bigger an allocation of land they're going to need, right? So these things actually matter. Okay. Yeah.
When they talk about counting people in the tribe, is that just men? Or does that include women? Does it include servants, children, everybody?
No, this particular census is males.
All males.
Okay. And I mean, in general, frankly, in general, every census in the Torah is males. I don't like it necessarily, but I wasn't.
Yeah. Well, it could be misleading too. You know, let's say someone has, 10 girls. I guess they don't count.
Well, they don't count. I mean, a couple of things. One is that as we'll see, the primary reason for the sentence is to ascertain the number of men of military age. Okay, and since women didn't fight there was Devorah, there was Yael, but that was later. But as a general rule, women didn't participate in the military. But the other thing is that daughters didn't inherit. Right? Daughters didn't inherit. I mean, you know the story of the daughters of Tzlofchad, right? Who was a man who died and he had 5 daughters and no sons, right? And having 5 daughters and no sons, his inheritance was going to pass to his nephews instead of to his daughters, because daughters don't inherit, right? And the daughters of Tzlofchad, and interestingly, I mean, what is the name of Lot's wife? The name of Lot's wife is Lot's wife.
Right.
Right?
Right.
You could have thought that the names of the daughters of Tzlofchad would be daughters of Tzlofchad, right? But they're actually listed by names. They're listed by name.
They are.
And what?
Unusual.
Excuse me?
I said it's so unusual.
It is unusual. It's unusual, but what they did was unusual, right? They stood up for themselves and they went to Moses and they said, "Hey, Moses, this isn't fair." Right? So Moses, I mean, there are several instances in the Torah where somebody brings an issue to Moses. We saw this with Pesach Sheni, right? Where people who were impure on Pesach went to Moses, says, "Why should we be deprived of the Korban?" And Moses says, I agree with you. I agree with you. Wait here. Let me go check with God. I'll get back to you. Right? And he does the same thing with the daughters of Tzlofchad. Wait here, let me check with God. And God said, it's interesting. I mean, it's fascinating because it is clear that the God of the Torah is not the God of the philosophers, right? Because the God of the Torah acknowledges making mistakes, right? So God said, and you can almost hear like, oh yeah, they have a point. Cain benot Tzlofchad dobrot, right? The daughters of Tzlofchad have spoken correctly, right? And so he changes it. He, as a figure of speech, not that God is male, that if a man dies and has no sons but has daughters, the daughters can inherit, but they may not marry out of the tribe. Because if they marry out of the tribe, then the tribe loses the land, right? So, from our perspective, since we believe in romantic love and people should marry whoever they want, that seems unfair, right? But that's what you have. That's kind of the compromise. Okay. Next comment. Levet avotam, according to their father's houses. Mi she'aviv mishevet echad, somebody whose father was from one tribe, the imo mishevet acher, and his mother was from a different tribe, yakum al shevet aviv. He is counted he is counted as part of his father's tribe. Okay. Thoughts, comments? Remind you of anything?
How you determine an aliyah?
How you determine aliyah? Say more, Stan.
You follow the father, not the mother.
You follow the father and not the mother, right? In other words, you're a Kohen if your father's a Kohen. You're a Levi if your father's a Levi, right? And if your mother's a Kohen and your father's a Levi, you're a Levi whose mother is a Kohen, right? But and I have to say, I get this all the time, right? Because everybody knows, and it's interesting, there are things that everybody knows that just ain't so, right? To quote Ring Lardner. Everybody knows that in Judaism, the child's status follows the status of the mother. It's not so. It's not so. The child's status follows the status of the mother in a case of a prohibited marriage, right? In other words, it is actually inaccurate to say that in other words, if both of your parents are Jewish, it's really inaccurate to say you inherit your Jewishness from your mother. You actually inherit it from both parents.
Mhm.
It's only if one parent is Jewish and one parent is not, then it goes according to the mother. But if both parents are Jewish, it actually goes according to the father. You're a Kohen if your father's a Kohen, right? Which means, so what is the status of a person whose father is a Kohen and mother a Gentile?
And you're a Gentile.
They're a Gentile,
Maybe
right? And
right.
what if, having been born a Gentile, they convert?
Then don't they always say you're the son or daughter of Abraham and Sarah?
Right. Now, I mean, I would let them be called up by their father's name because, for the sake of peace, right? But they wouldn't be a Kohen.
Yeah.
They would not be a Kohen, right? And similarly, and this is something that is sometimes painful to people. I mean, and they're not aware of, or somebody who was adopted, right? And that's really painful. Somebody who was adopted and raised by a Jewish family, and their father is a Kohen, and they assume they're a Kohen. They're not, and that can be sometimes really painful, right? But so in this case, if it's an intermarriage, right, by which we mean a marriage between two tribes, not a marriage between an Israelite and a non-Israelite, but if there's a marriage between two different tribes, the offspring are accounted to the father's tribe. Okay, and why would we do that? I mean, what's the reasoning behind it? Think back to the daughters of Tzlofchad.
Well, it's the keeping the land and things within the tribe.
Exactly, right? That if you had a Benjaminite and a Reubenite, married, right? And they have children, and we count the children as Reubenites, right? Then when the Benjaminite father dies, the land is now in the control of the tribe of Reuben, not the tribe of Benjamin. We don't want that. We want land to stay within the tribe, right? So there's a practical necessity. Right. I mean, today it doesn't matter, right? And today, anyway, I'm a Kohen. How do I know I'm a Kohen? Because my father told me he's a Kohen, right? How do I know? How does my father know he's a Kohen? Because his father told him he's a Kohen, right? Do I know with 100% certainty that I'm actually a Kohen?
No.
No.
I have
Right. Everybody, and similarly, Stan, what you're Yisrael, right?
Yes.
How do you know? How do you know you're not really?
How do I know?
How do you know you're not really a
Because
Kohen?
my great grandfather was in Israel.
Yeah, but how do you know? How did he know? Maybe you're really a Kohen. Maybe you're really a Levi. Right? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. So we just.
My mother told me.
Yeah. Well, how
My
did
mother
she know?
told me.
But you see my point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, lineage is not.
I'm a Levite because I was a Levine.
Lineage is not firmly established, right? So as a result, like for example, if I officiate at a Pidyon Haben as a Kohen, I'm not allowed to keep the money. I have to donate it to tzedakah, right? Because if it turns out that I'm not really a Kohen, right, the money's not legitimately mine, and then it's theft. Okay. Legugalotam, according to their head count, Golgolet means a skull. Okay. I mean, if you know anything about Christian history, right, the hill on which Jesus was crucified was known as Golgotha. That's Aramaic, but it's the same word. It means the place of the skull. Okay. There are all kinds of reasons. How many of you have been in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? No one but
I
me?
think I have.
Okay, Stan.
I have, I think.
Yeah. So there's
That's
all,
the one
there's
with the
all
with the
kinds of
horns?
explanations they give as to why it's called Golgotha. But Golgolet means a skull. Okay, and so here what Rashi is doing, Al Yadei Shekalim Beka Legolgolet. Okay, he's quoting from elsewhere. Frankly, I don't remember off the top of my head where this is. I remember the quote, but I don't remember where it's from. A half shekel per head, right? And we read this before Pesach, right? Shabbat Shekalim, right? What's Shabbat Shekalim? Right? We have a special moft here, right? Where we read there was a commandment that every year, every man between age 20 and age 60 had to donate precisely half a shekel for the maintenance of the temple, right? Hadal lo yamit ve'ashir lo yarbe mimachatzit hashekel, right? The poor will not give less and the rich will not give more. Everybody gives half a shekel. Why half a shekel? I mean, why can't I give extra if I'm feeling generous?
I think they wanted everybody to feel equal.
That's poetic, but I think wrong.
Was it to do with
But
the census?
wasn't this also in a way of counting the men who could be military?
Right. It's a census, right? If I'm not allowed to take a census,
That tells you how much.
right? I'm not allowed to count Jews. Nobody said I can't count half shekels,
Right.
right? So if I have 150,000 half shekels, it means I have 150,000 men of military age,
Right.
right? And so what Rashi is doing, you see what he's doing? He's harmonizing, right? We have one place that says don't count Jews, but you can count half shekels. And another place where God says take a census. Right? Now, I, as a university trained heretic, can say represents two different sources. They didn't know about each other, and whoever wrote this didn't know that elsewhere it says no census. Perfectly fine for me because I'm an Apikoros, right? No good for Rashi, right? Rashi sees the text as a unitary document and he must harmonize, and therefore he says, yes, they took a census. How did they take the census? By means of the half shekel,
Yeah.
right? And he can do that because there's the word skull in this verse and the word skull in that verse.
Ah. Yeah.
And at the beginning of the service in the morning where we read Rabbi Yishmael Omer b'shloshes midot haTorah nidrashet, right? The 13 hermeneutical principles of Rabbi Yishmael. One is Gzera Shava. Gzera Shava means same word. Okay, so if you have particular, now obviously Echad, Echad appears in a lot of places, right? Golgolit is not such a common word, right? So if you have Golgolit here and Golgolit here, it's precisely to allow you to harmonize the two verses. Okay, and so because you have the word skull in the commandment to take the half shekel, and you have the word skull in the commandment to take a census, skull in there means the same thing as skull in there. And therefore, when God says take a census, he doesn't mean take a census. He means count up half shekels, right? Because otherwise, God would be telling you to commit an avera. Okay. If we go down to 49, I know we skipped a lot, but it's all names and genealogies. Ach, which means nevertheless or only, really ach, nevertheless. Et mate levi lo tifkod, ve'et rosham lo tisa. You shall not number and you shall not reckon their sum among the children of Israel. Okay, why? The legion of the king deserves to be counted on its own, right? So, and I mean, that doesn't exactly off the top of the head, that sounds very sort of homiletical. But I think it actually means something, right? Because if the Levites are assigned to the tabernacle, right, it's useful to know how many Levites there are, right? You need to know, right? You need to know what your staff is, right? But then another explanation, the Kadosh Baruch Hu foresaw that a decree was destined to be enacted against all those counted from 20 years and upwards, condemning them to die in the desert. He said, let these not be included, for they are mine, since they did not err in the sin of the golden calf, right? So it's a different explanation, right? We know that everybody who left Egypt died in the desert, right?
Yes.
because of the sin of the calf. But Rashi here is saying, and I mean, I see no indication of this elsewhere in the Torah, but maybe it is. Rashi says not counting the Levites, okay? Because the Levites didn't participate in the sin of the golden calf, right? And that's why they were chosen to be the tribe that is, elevated above the others and takes care of the tabernacle. Right now, I have to say, as a Kohen, in all honesty, I find this extremely problematic, right? Because if the Levites, get this special status because they didn't participate in the sin of the golden calf, Kohanim are the descendants of Aaron, right? I mean, frankly, from my perspective, there's no one more involved in the sin of the golden calf than Aaron.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
Right? Right. Now, the rabbinic tradition goes to great lengths to clear him of that sin. Right? I mean, he knew, and I mean, I can see this. I'm going to bring up a seemingly completely unrelated question and ask you what the rabbi should do. Okay? Family, all right, let's imagine a world, okay, where people can go to their synagogue building and have a bar mitzvah and then have the bar mitzvah party in the shul, right? And the family comes to the rabbi and says, we want to have our party in the shul right after the service, but we want to have a band. All right, we want to have music, okay? And Linda, you're shaking your head.
No, yeah, you can't
Right?
do that.
Why not?
It's Shabbos.
It's Shabbat, right? So the rabbi should say no music,
Yeah.
right? Well, interestingly enough, Rabbi Joel Roth, who was the head of the law committee for a long time and actually quit the law committee when they decided to ordain gays. Okay, so not exactly a flaming liberal, right? Joel Roth says you should let them have the party in the shul with music. Why would he say that? If you don't let them have the party in the shul with music,
They'll go out and have a party with music.
They'll go out and have a party
okay.
with music, and what are they going to eat at that party with music?
No, it's not kosher either, so it's getting worse.
Great, right? They're gonna. It's not like, oh, Rabbi, well, since you say no, right, we won't, right? They'll go to a kosher restaurant, a treif restaurant. They'll have music and they'll have treif, right? If you let them have it in the synagogue, they'll have music, but they'll eat kosher, right? Not having music is a biblical, is a rabbinic violation. Eating treif is a biblical violation, right? So I have saved that, right? In other words, we don't think this way. We think these are our rules and they must be obeyed, right? But the only ones who obey them are we rabbis, right? And our ritual committees enforce them, but they don't personally obey them either, right? Why am I saying this? Because Aaron says to himself, according to the rabbis, if I don't make the golden calf, what's going to happen? They'll kill me
And make it
then
anyway.
they'll make the golden calf, right? So bad enough that they're going to commit idolatry. They should also commit murder, right? So it's not a bad argument, actually. It's not actually a bad argument. I don't know if it's true, right? But the rabbinic tradition goes to great lengths to clear Aaron of this sin. Okay.
Can I just ask one question?
Yes, please,
Sort
absolutely.
of like a sideline. If what they say is true, that the Levites had nothing to do with the golden calf, can we assume that some of the Levites that left Egypt were permitted into the promised land? That,
According to this Rashi, you would have to assume that.
okay, because
Yeah, I mean, I find no evidence of that elsewhere in the Torah, but yes, Rashi would, it would seem to follow from this Rashi that were the case.
okay. And I know you're a Cohen, so Kohen, so I'm going to be careful as I say this.
Yes.
But if you follow that logic, that the Levites were not involved and everyone else was, that would imply that the Kohanes were involved, that they worshiped the golden calf the same as.
No, because the Kohanim are a subset of the Levi'im.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah,
Didn't
the
know that.
Kohanim are a subset of the Levi'im.
Okay.
Right.
So they should have been given special status
Right.
too, in that regard.
Right. No, I mean, from the perspective of tribal affiliation, because Moses and Aaron were Levi'im, and the Kohanim are the descendants of Aaron. So the Kohanim are a subset of Levi. I know it's confusing, and the reason that it's confusing is because we tend to speak colloquially in English of tribe as Kohen, Levi, Yisrael.
Right.
Right, and therefore Kohen a different tribe than Levi. But that's not, I mean, it's really not tribe, it's really just classification, right? Because there were 12 tribes, and Levi was one of them, and the Kohanim were a family within the tribe of Levi. So when they're parceling out the land, except Levi didn't get land, but
Right.
but the Kohanim are part of Levi for that. It would be like, for example, again, to use a contemporary reference, right? I mean, there's always, right, a move that DC should become a state, right? And then people say, well, that's not fair, not fair, blah, blah, blah. Not fair meaning because they'd elect 2 Republican senators. But so there's a proposal, which is not necessarily a bad proposal, return DC to Maryland, right? Then at least the people who live in DC will still have senators without adding to, right? In which case DC would be a subset of Maryland, right? In the same way that the Kohanim are a subset of Levi, right? So because we say tribe, because really, if you're not a Kohen or a Levi, you don't really know what tribe you belong to, right? You know that you're from one of the 11 other tribes, but you don't know which one. Right now, there are people who have a family legend that they're descended from King David, or a family legend that they're descended from this person or that person, but that's even more tenuous, really, than being a Kohen or a Levi. But the premise of your question in terms of Levi is correct. I mean, the Torah is explicit that when Moses comes down and sees the golden calf and he says, whoever is on God's side, join me, the Levites are the ones who join him. Okay, and the Levites are the one who go through the camp and massacre massacre in God's mercy all the people who worship the calf. All right, so now this is an interesting, to me anyway, Rashi. The Ele Toldot Aharon Umoshe. These are the descendants of Aaron and Moses. Bayom Daber Hashem et Moshe Bahar Sinai. These are the descendants of Aaron and Moses on the day that the Lord spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai. Okay, now you don't necessarily know the premise on which the rest of this commentary is made, but let me find it in the Torah. All right, so I'll just read it in English, right? This is the line of Aaron and Moses at the time that the Lord spoke with Moses on Mount Sinai. These were the names of Aaron's son, Nadav, the firstborn, Avihu, Eleazar, and Itamar. Those were the names of Aaron's sons, the anointed priests who were ordained for priesthood. But Nadav and Avihu died by the will of the Lord when they offered alien fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai, and they left no sons. So it was Eleazar and Itamar who served as priests in the lifetime of their father Aaron. Okay, so having said that, what is weird or problematic about chapter 3, verse 1?
Two of Aaron's sons died. I wouldn't say were
Right.
killed, but I'm not sure. Have those sons already died, or did you name those two?
No, they already died, Nadav and Avihu.
They already died. Okay.
Right.
Moses have sons.
Moses had sons, but they're not in the list.
Right.
Right?
Oh,
These are the descendants of Moses and Aaron. Nadav, Avihu, who died, Eleazar and Itamar, who didn't die, and they were Kohanim and they had children, right? So why is it the line of Moses and Aaron, right? It's just the line of Moses, right? Right? Moses had two sons.
Yeah.
Right? But they're not.
Commentary
Kohanim.
says.
What?
I thought the commentary said that if you learn from whom you learn, you're a child.
Right. No, exactly. But I didn't get there yet.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I'll back up.
Right. I mean, Moses had two sons. They're not Kohanim. They're not anything special.
Right.
The line of Moses disappears in the dustbin of history.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody can walk around with any confidence, even, remote confidence, saying, I am a descendant of Moses, right? I can walk around with a reasonable degree of confidence. I'm a descendant of Aaron. Right? Is 100% certain? Certainly not, but,
No.
I mean, there's enough similarity in the DNA of Kohanim who've been tested that it's at least, plausible, right? So, but that's right. These are the descendants of Moses and Aaron, yet only the sons of Aaron are mentioned. However, they are considered descendants of Moses because he taught them Torah. This teaches us that whoever teaches Torah to the son of his fellow man, Scripture regards it as if he had begotten him. Okay, and I will tell you, I mean, first of all, this is halachically the case. If you have a Rav Muvhak, person who's really your Rebbe, and they die, you sit shiva for them. Okay, and I actually, some of you have heard me tell this story before, all right. So before I tell the story, so I'm childless. I married late in life. I don't have children, right? But I have, from the time that I was a Hillel director, a number of my students who became rabbis. Right, and one in particular, who is he's still fairly young, but he's really one of the great rabbis of the conservative movement, Rabbi Aaron Brusso in Mount Kisco, and he is a rabbi because of me. Period. So he's my son in that regard, and all of the Torah that he spreads in the world accrues at least partially to me as well, right? And frankly, that's a degree of consolation for the fact that I don't have children of my own. But here's the story, and then we'll wrap up. So on Purim of 1986, I flew to Israel on El Al. Okay, it was Purim 1986. We take off from New York, supposed to be a nonstop flight, right? As soon as we take off, the pilot announces that we're actually going to land in Montreal and pick up some passengers and then continue on to Israel. But since it's fairly late and people are hungry, we're not going to give dinner until after we leave Montreal, but we know you're hungry, so we're going to pass out sandwiches, right? So I know this is a long story, but it's worth it, I think. So they start handing out sandwiches, and I guess the person sitting behind me didn't hear the announcement, and she looks at her sandwich and she says to the flight attendant, "This is dinner?" And he says, "No, ma'am, it's just a snake." Okay, so we eat our snakes and we land in Montreal, and a bunch more passengers get on, and then we see this commotion coming up the aisle, and when I decipher the commotion, it's a Canadian cop, an Israeli cop, a guy in handcuffs, an Israeli cop, a Canadian cop, right? They go to the back of the plane, they handcuff the guy to the seat, the Canadian cops get off the plane, we take off, right? We take off, they give us dinner, no more snakes, they give us dinner. We fly for a few hours, now it's like 3 in the morning, the pilot gets on the
intercom.
The intercom, thank you. And he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, please prepare for landing. In approximately 30 minutes, we will be landing at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport."
What?
Okay. When we got to Gander, Newfoundland, the inertial navigation system was faulty. The backup inertial navigation system was also faulty.
Oh, God.
So we were not allowed to cross the ocean. We have to go back to New York to have it fixed, right? So we land in New York, and then they tell us that we have to stay on the plane because we landed in Canada. It's possible that people got on the plane who are not authorized to enter the United States. And, you know, in Europe, they have the concept of a transit lounge, right? You don't have to go, if you're flying from New York to Tel Aviv via Amsterdam, you don't have to go through passport control in Amsterdam. You just stay in the transit lounge. But there's no transit lounge here, right? So we have to stay on the plane. They don't have a transit lounge, but they do have a jail. So the prisoner, he gets off the plane to wait in the jail. Everybody else has to wait in the plane, right? And now, several hours later, they fixed the plane, but now they are bumping up against the maximum hours that the crew is allowed to work. So, right, so they have to round up a new El Al crew in New York, right? Which they do. Okay, but then they announce, you know, so we have a new crew, but unfortunately, we can't find kosher meals for 300 people with no notice in New York. So eventually we're going to run out of food, but to make up for it, the alcohol is free. So,
What's the problem with that?
no, well, the problem with that is that I hadn't learned to like bourbon yet. So, so we take off again, and we're flying, and I for the first time notice that there are a lot of young men on the flight, including my seat. Well, so I was in the window, the middle seat was empty, the guy at the aisle seat. These frum-looking guys wearing white shirts, black velvet kippot, and their shirts are torn. Okay, and so what does that mean? I know what it means.
Yeah.
It means that some prominent rabbi has
Yeah.
died, and his body is on the plane. I didn't know who, so I asked. And if I had told this story 20 years ago, the name Moshe Feinstein would maybe have been familiar. I don't know if anybody ever heard of Moshe Feinstein. But Moshe Feinstein was the Posek Hador. He was the halachic decisor of the generation. Okay, and he's still quoted. I mean, the whole reason, for example, that the OU gives hashgacha on stuff that's regular milk and not halav Yisrael, ruling by Moshe Feinstein. Okay, so Moshe Feinstein had died. His body was on the plane being brought. He lived on the Lower East Side. His yeshiva was on the Lower East Side. His body was being brought to Jerusalem to be buried. Okay, so, you know, I had an interesting flight talking Torah to these guys. You know, because being a Kohen, I said, wait a second, there's a body on the flight. Is that a problem? And I found out that there are Kohanim who don't fly on El Al because it's a reasonable assumption that on any particular El Al flight, there's a body. But mostly they hold that it's okay because it's basically, it's a double coffin in the cargo hold. Okay, so there's 3 layers of interference between you and the dead body. So, you know, the normative position is that it's not a problem, but some Kohanim are really strict and don't fly El. So we fly and we land, and the airport is absolutely a zoo. I mean, it was literally, the traffic was literally backed up from the entrance of Jerusalem to the airport because of the funeral cortege for Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. And remember, we're now almost a full day late.
Yeah.
Right? And so several years later, I mean, this is, to me, is the most interesting part of the story. I am talking to somebody who was ordained by Moshe Feinstein. And he says, you know, when he died and he knew he was dying, and he asked us not to send his body on Purim, but to hold it for a day, because he didn't want to ruin Purim for the people in Israel. But we didn't listen to him. So God intervened and made the flight a day late so that he didn't land on Purim. And I looked at him and I said, I was on that flight. Okay, but what's also interesting is that it shows how Hasidism and yeshivish world are merging, right? Because miracle stories, people tell about Hasidic rabbis miracle stories all the time, right? But a miracle story about a Lithuanian yeshiva, Rosh Yeshiva, that's not something you hear, right? But anyway, so God intervened so that Purim wouldn't be ruined for everybody in Israel, but my Purim nevertheless was
ruined.
And, you know, kachaya, that's how it was. All right. Good night, folks.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Great.
Thank
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
See you tomorrow.
Yep.
Yeah.